So I'm from the Syracuse Peace Council, in case anyone didn't know, and I'm not going to take the time to tell you what we do, but we do a lot of amazing things. But one of the things we've done for over almost 2 decades, I think, is work on Palestine. And so this is a culmination of years and years of work of the Peace Council and part of our ongoing programming, education, and like we like to say, we educate, we agitate, and we organize. So that's who I am, and my name is Lee. I would also like to thank our co-sponsors, Syracuse Jewish Voice for Peace, CNY Solidarity, Veterans for Peace Local Chapter 51, Syracuse Party for Socialism and Liberation, Peace Action Lemoyne, Students for Justice in Palestine Lemoyne, Syracuse for Palestine and Global Liberation, and the faculty and staff for Justice in Palestine at Syracuse University. So you can see there are a lot of organizations in this very city that work hard on this issue. And so I'd like you to get to know some of them. So first I'm going to call up our representative from Faculty and Staff for Justice in Palestine at SU, who happens to be Sarah Maraglia. And I'm just going to pass the mic to her. You can kind of talk from there, Sarah, if you want.
Hello, everybody. Nice to see everybody. Hello, Diane. Okay, so as Lee noted, I am here representing faculty and staff for Justice in Palestine at SU's campus. FSJP is part of a national network. As part of this national network, we are decentralized. We include more than 130 affiliated campus chapters. We work with and take our lead from faculty, students, and universities in Palestine, those that are still remaining after a relentless bombing campaign. We work with students at a national level and to support them in their work on different campuses, particularly Students for Justice in Palestine. At Syracuse, we assist students when they get conduct violations for daring to repeat the phrase, globalize the Intifada. And we assist them in meeting with their faculty members and meeting with the administration. And we also host educational events on campus. So we have just a couple of materials on the SPC table. We have a sign-up sheet if you're interested in knowing what FSJP is up to at SU. Please put your name on our list and you will get our emails. We also have a QR code to our Instagram account, which is where we do a lot of our organizing and announcements. And if you are with an organization and you have an interest in organizing, supporting, or co-organizing with FSJP, please check the box on our sign-in sheet and someone from the group will get back to you. Okay, so I think I'm gonna pass it back to Lee now.
Thank you, Sarah. It was good to hear from your organization, especially with school getting started. Next, we're going to hear from the Syracuse Party for Socialism and Liberation. Carly, I don't even think I know your last name, but Carly Berry.
Thanks, Lee. Hi, I'm Carly. I'm here with the Party for Socialism and Liberation. Yeah, we're so appreciative of Phyllis Bennis for being here along with our special guest, Bob Sanders. So shout out to Syracuse Peace Council and all the other co-sponsors tonight for bringing such vibrance to this space to represent Palestine and the ongoing struggle. We have to break the dissonance. That is always our common goal. I can feel it here. The U.S. is an active participant in the genocide. We're not removed. And we see the complicity in the genocide of Gaza here in the city of Syracuse. Lockheed Martin is actively intaking shipments of parts for F-35 radar systems that are being supplied by Maersk through train shipments. So Maersk is the main supplier of the parts, and local businesses such as the Song Commercial Delivery are complicit in shipping the parts off the train carts to Lockheed Martin. So yeah, this just shows the complicity in the genocide of Gaza and militarism at a local level. It's here in our backyard. Our goal as socialists is to really connect our struggles and raise consciousness. Because again, this is here in our backyards, and we're all connected through struggle. Yeah, we're helping the Syracuse Peace Council sell some books tonight by Phyllis Bennis. So come over and get a book, and feel free to talk to us a little bit about socialism.
Thank you, Carly. So the next organization is the Syracuse Jewish Voice for Peace, and I'm going to pass the mic to them.
Thank you very much. Really? Hi, good evening. My name is LJ, or Jaffe. I'm part of Jewish Voice for Peace Syracuse. I will not talk too much about our organization beyond to say that if you're interested in getting involved, please come and talk to Hezekiah and myself. What I do want to talk about are two different actions that you can take tonight. One is to call John Mannion and tell him to sign the Block the Bombs Act. We have a sample script here, as well as more information about what the Block the Bombs Act is, which is essentially to stop sending U.S. bombs to Israel to enable the genocide. The other thing that we have here is about the Break the Bombs New York State campaign, which is a statewide campaign to divest the New York State Common Retirement Fund from Israel bonds. These campaigns are happening across the country, but our campaign is particularly significant here in New York State because we are the second largest holder of Israel bonds in the country, behind only Palm Beach County with $350 million worth of Israel bonds in our state pension fund. These are not only ethically unconscionable, they are bad, fiscally irresponsible investments that our New York State Comptroller is sinking money into. So we're asking folks to sign on to a petition that says we do not support the purchase of Israel bonds with our tax dollars and with public sector workers' pension funds. So particularly if you are a member or beneficiary of the New York State and local retirement system, your voice and your signature can have an even larger impact. We have more information on the Break the Bonds campaign here. We have some Know Your Rights documents, resources, as well as paper and digital petitions and information on our social media. We are planning to present the petition, which has over 3,000 signatures. We want to get to over 4,000 signatures. We need your help to do that. We're planning to present the petition to the New York State Comptroller in September. He is the sole decision maker for the fund, which really works in our favor on this campaign. There is no passing the buck or saying, oh, I don't have the authority. It's New York State Comptroller Tom DiNapoli, and only New York State Comptroller Tom DiNapoli, who has the power to stop buying Israel bonds, which again are a shitty investment in funding genocide and apartheid in Palestine. So please encourage folks to sign on to the petition, call Mannion and support the Block the Bombs Act, and come over here and talk to us because we have a whole lot more information, as well as free t-shirts.
Thank you very much, and I encourage people to wander over to the table and sign if you haven't, please. That would be really, really helpful thing to do. You can also go to the Syracuse Peace Council table and make yourself a poppy to stick behind your ear. We have poppy making materials there, as well as some zines and that type of stuff. So be sure you check out the tables. Our next speaker is speaking for two. Spike Amelia will be speaking for the Syracuse for Palestine and Global Liberation Group, and also for DSA. Welcome.
Hey folks, so just a quick rundown on Syracuse DSA. We are an autonomous and democratically organized branch of the Democratic Socialists of America, operating here in Syracuse. And in the central New York region at large. Members of Syracuse DSA are active in a broader advocacy community organizing to build a better world for the working class. Our chapter is currently working on several projects that include international solidarity in BDS, electoral organizing, tenant organizing, labor and strike-ready solidarity, mutual aid and abolition, amongst other things. We're a political and activist organization, not a political party. Through campus community-based chapters, DSA members use a variety of tactics from legislative to direct action to fight for reforms that empower working people. A lot of DSA members joined with SU students and community members to help with the Gaza Solidarity Encampment on SU. Out of that came Syracuse for Palestinian and Global Liberation that was formed after the encampment was taken down. As the school year ended, so did the usefulness of the encampment, but many of us were not done organizing for an end to the genocide in Palestine and agreed that we wanted to extend the fight to include other oft-preyed-upon populations, such as those in Sudan and Congo. We originally focused on fundraising and direct actions, being loud and calling attention to the issue and finding a way to send aid to connections members had made in Palestine. Over the past 17 months, we've transformed several times, including recently when we decided that our efforts may be better served in partnering with other local organizations, such as Syracuse Peace Council, to help bring the community together around the issue. SPGL not only aims to help with more events such as the one we are all here to enjoy tonight, but a handful of our members are currently working to create a halal-free store. In connection with our second annual Ramadan Unity Fair this upcoming year, we will host this free store to support our Muslim community in Syracuse. To help with this initiative, we're seeking donations of clothing, shoes, and school supplies. We hope to provide an opportunity specifically for our Muslim sisters to find accessible and modest clothing. So we are looking for, especially for donations of long skirts, dresses, hijabs, scarves, long pants, and long sleeve shirts. Please see our table for info about making such donations, and stay tuned for updates about the Ramadan Unity Fair for 2026. Thank you.
I gotta go, Ann. I gotta go. Do you have a question?
Yeah, never mind.
Thank you very much, Amelia. Oh, there was something I was going to say that was like super important. Oh, now I can't remember. Anyways, I'd like to introduce our next speaker, Raji. Raji's going to share a bit to encourage people to consider going to the West Bank this fall to offer protective presents for Palestinian farmers during the olive harvest. They went to the West Bank in April. We are hoping to organize a sort of a report back, maybe in September, but we invited Raji to come and share with us some of their experiences.
I'll go back there. Are we?
Thank you. Hi everybody, I'm Raji. I did go to the West Bank in April. I went with an organization to support Palestinian farmers in the West Bank. I did not do protective presence, which is quite different, but that is what I'm going to encourage folks to consider. If you've never heard of it, it's been happening for decades. It's an invitation for folks, international folks in particular, to come, as well as folks in Israel, to come and support Palestinian farmers as they do the olive harvest in October. Just the presence of internationals is a deterrent to settler violence. So I know a lot of folks have done this. I'm not able to stay the full night, but certainly if folks are interested, Lee could give you my contact. There's many organizations that do this. You go with a group, and you're literally there supporting farmers on their land to do the olive harvest. I'm sure a lot of folks know that in the last 21 months, in addition to the genocide in Gaza, there has also been a large number of communities that have been forcibly displaced in the West Bank. So this is really important to help people be able to harvest olives. And also I will say there is financial support from the Syracuse Peace Council for folks to go. Obviously this is not possible for everyone. This is an intense thing and you have to have the time and ability to it, but it is possible for folks. And I really just want to say, like, yeah, I went there in April, I spent 2 weeks there, you know. In addition to all the Palestinians who live there, lots of internationals go to Palestine all the time. It is really a possible thing. And just encourage folks to do that, or to learn more about it if it's something that you could consider, or also maybe talk to Lee if you wanted to support someone else to go. So I think that's what I want to say. Thank you, Lee, for inviting me.
You're welcome. And please, one of the things that Justice for Palestine, the Syracuse Peace Council has been doing for a number of years, is raising some money to send people to the West Bank. So as Raji mentioned, we do have scholarships that we can help with. We really, really encourage people to think about going. And if anyone wants to learn more, they can get a hold of Raji either through me or directly with Raji, or you can reach out to the Peace Council if you want to know more about what kind of financial support we can offer. So thank you very much, Raji, for making that important connection for us. And we are at the point in the time here where I'm scanning the audience and looking for, there he is, Bob. Bob, are you about ready? So I'd like to introduce Bob Sanders. Bob is a 70-year-old cyclist, among other things, who has been riding cross-country to raise awareness about Israel's ethnic cleansing of Gaza and the West Bank that is encouraged and paid for by our tax dollars. So let's not forget that, everyone. He is a Jewish American, and the Ride Against the War on Gaza, Raw Gaza Project, is supported by the American Friends Service Committee. He is a member of New Hampshire Peace Action, of which there's a chapter here from New York, and is the founder of Not in My Name, New Hampshire, a group of Jewish Americans opposed to Israel's violence against Palestinians. And we're really, really happy. It's very much happenstance or serendipity that Bob was coming through Syracuse at this exact time. So this wasn't planned, but it works well, and it makes a nice addition to our time with Phyllis Bennis. So here you go, Bob.
Hi. Thank you. I'm not new to Syracuse. I lived here for 4 years. I was a reporter for the Post-Standard, 88 to 92. And I took off from activism about 40 years, and now I'm back at it now that I retired. I'm particularly honored to be with Phyllis Bennis. I heard from her the last time I saw her. She was speaking in New Hampshire. It was at a Peace Action event, and my daughter Alicia, who is going to join me tomorrow night on this ride, was there. She got the award for the youngest activist, and Granny D, who was walked across the country in her 90s for campaign reform, got the oldest. And there's a picture, but Alicia didn't get it to me in time, but I couldn't get it up there anyhow. So I could just show my phone to everybody. But Granny D was one of the things that inspired me to do this. I went across the country when I was 20, and I was a college student. I didn't know what the heck I was doing. I was to find myself and find the country and so forth. And this is the 50th anniversary. I'm 70 now. And that was the initial reason I wanted to do this. Granny D, when she did this for campaign reform, I had that in the background, and I kind of wanted to do it for a cause. The cause came shortly after I retired in 2023, and that was October 7th and the aftermath. I'm Jewish, and I still have trouble believing that a Jewish nation could commit genocide. I really, I was very, I guess upset is to put it mildly. I knew about this issue for years, but I didn't say anything or get involved because it was filled with tension for my family. I have an uncle who was in Auschwitz, whose lessons from the Holocaust was Jews first and everybody else the heck with. And that's a lot of reaction or a lot of the lessons Jewish people have from the Holocaust. Fortunately, there are people like Jewish Voice for Peace and other organizations that are standing up and working for peace in the area, and their lesson is never again.
When I see people going for food and getting shot, when I see people who are herded into, basically camps, safe zones for safety, and they're bombed later on when they change their mind about where it is. This is horror. This is what the Holocaust was. How could anybody remain silent when this is going on? How could I have? So I want to make up for it. That's why I'm doing this journey. I started May 30th in California. I was interrupted when a Jeep hit me from behind. It was an accident, I believe. I didn't have my jersey on. This is what my jersey says from the back. But I had to take a month off, so I'm not really going across the country. I also missed the Rocky Mountains, so it wasn't all bad. And I went to Minnesota so I could keep schedule, so I can attend these events. And most people didn't believe I would get back on the bike again. Now, I didn't break any bones or my leg, so that would have been difficult. But my helmet was cracked. And by the way, wear a helmet. Believe me, it saved my life. Otherwise, my skull would have been cracked. And I was nothing like, I was going to, people say, well, I bike safety. It doesn't matter. If you're hit by from behind by a Jeep, anyway, that's a side thing. Anyway, I picked up the ride in Minnesota, and here I am. I don't want to take too much time. How am I doing? Okay. Yes, I'm every time I say something different when I come up here, so you never know what I'm going to say. So I'm speaking tomorrow, and some of this may be the same, but there'll be other things different. And May Memorial, they're letting a Jew, do a little speech about Judaism and Palestine, and May Memorial, 10:30 to 11:30. You'll have to suffer through a service and some more words from me, but there are supposedly cookies and stuff at the end. There's also, if you want to find out more about my ride, I usually talk about donations, but I don't want to take away from what's going on here. But there is, back here, kind of a little tiny, or such a big room, but if you go up there with your camera, you can find out more. There are some people, older generation, that don't like QR codes. So if you want to find out more, you go to New Hampshire Peace Action. They're kind of the main sponsor of the trip. And it will go in, and then you'll see me on the website. A link to our website explains everything. Or you can follow us on Facebook or Instagram. I just want to say the other thing that is very important to me is basically, I think it's been brought up here, our bombs are funding this genocide. Our tax dollars are going for it. I think what I really like about this room is that there are all sorts of groups. A lot of times I go to a place and groups don't talk to each other and sometimes come together to actually hear me and talk to each other, but there's a younger generation that's kind of pro-Palestine and the older generation that's more just from the peace movement. And a lot of times people don't talk. I'm seeing this here. I think it's great, and you guys should be a model for the Palestine and peace movement throughout the country. So.
Thanks, Bob. Thank you, Bob.
Well, thank you all. Thank you for being here. tonight. Thank you to the Syracuse Peace Center, which I have admired for years since the calendar began. Well, I don't know if it was when it began, no. But at some point, when I came across the calendar, I have loved the Syracuse Peace Center since then. And I just want to say thanks for one other thing. When I walked in here tonight, I had been all day and yesterday at the Kateri Peace Conference outside of Albany. And I walked in and there were the rows of tables in the colors of the Palestinian flag. And what it reminded me of, and of course I started weeping because these days we do a lot of weeping, was the video that I have watched maybe half a dozen times called Guernica, Gaza. I don't know how many of you have seen it, but in the town in Spain, the town that was bombed by Franco of Guernica, the town of the great painting of Picasso, they came together some weeks into the genocide and had everybody in town in a line take up positions where packets on the ground were laying, and at a signal, each of them opened the packets. They were in different colors, green or white or black or red. And they were plastic ponchos that they put on, and the camera tilted back away, and you saw it was the Palestinian flag, as if to prove a point here. And it was shooting back and forth with photographs from Guernica. And it's astonishing to watch. I urge you all to take a look at it. It's an amazing thing. This is a time, something that Gramsci said a long time ago. Many of you will know the quote when he said, "This is the time that the old world is dying and the new world is struggling to be born. This is a time of monsters." This is very much where we are right now. This is a time of monsters. I'm going to be on the road for another week or so. I don't know what my city, I live in Washington, D.C., I don't know what it's going to look like when I get back. We just read today that the National Guard is now going to be armed at all times. I didn't actually realize that they were not armed before. I assumed they were, but apparently they weren't, and it was bad enough when they were not armed. We don't know what that is going to mean. We know that that occupation of Washington is costing about $1 million a day. It's going to be more because they're bringing in more National Guard troops from the rest of the country. We're supposed to be feeling safer as a result of that. Yeah. Right. But that $1 million a day, $30 million for the first month, that's assuming they don't get a extension. $30 million, imagine what we could do with $30 million to cover the cost of housing all the houseless people in my city, right? How many kids could get into Head Start? How many veterans could get health care? How many houses could be retrofitted with green technology? So many things. $30 million in the context of the military budget, which this year will top $1 trillion. $30 million is kind of chump change. But when you back away from the military budget, $30 million is a ton of money that could pay for a lot of kids to get into Head Start, and a lot of veterans to get health care, a lot of all of that. And yet we are told there is no money for jobs, for health care, for education. Why not? Because half of it is going to the rich in tax cuts, and the other half is going to the military budget. We don't hear enough about that. It used to be a little difficult to talk about the aid to Israel, the military support for Israel every year. The $3.8 billion a year that Israel got every year for the last 8 years and is expected to last at least another 2 years. Because that sounded like chump change relative to hundreds of billions of dollars in the military budget. But now it's not looking like chump change anymore. Last year, the United States paid Israel $17.9 billion to buy weapons and gave them other weapons. This year, we're already up towards 22 billion. Billion with a B, right? So what we are looking at is this time of madness and monsters. When we're looking at people going hungry in the United States and now people starving to death in Gaza. When I was preparing some notes in the last couple of days for these presentations over the last few days, I always try to get the most up-to-date numbers that I can because they change so fast. And I'm still trying to, but I've kind of given up because you kind of can't keep up, right? The number of people killed in Gaza is now over 62,000 people. Of those, 19,000 are children. 19,000 are children. Israel has just acknowledged that 83% of all the casualties that they have inflicted on the people of Gaza in this genocide are civilians. They are no longer claiming that we're only going after terrorists, we're only going after militants, we're only going after armed people, or whatever it is that they were saying. They are now acknowledging what the whole world has long known, that they are killing civilians, and it's not an accident. It's not an accident. This is not collateral damage. This is intentional, deliberate, paid for by the United States, armed by the United States, direct damage. There is nothing collateral about it. So if we look at some of those numbers, there were, when I last looked, 263 people that we know of, who we can identify, who have died of hunger-related causes. 263. Of them, 112 have been children. The numbers go up exponentially. They don't go up just gradually. On the 20th of July, there had been 86 people, the entire year and a half to date, there had been 86 people who died of hunger-related causes. In the next 3 weeks alone, that figure went up to 222. That's how fast it is now growing. It's not just growing at the same speed, it's now growing faster and faster and faster. We will soon be at the point when more people are dying of hunger and dehydration from lack of water than are dying under the bombs and under the drones and by the guns. And people, of course, are living in an area, a territory, where 90% of the homes have been destroyed or seriously damaged, where all 12 universities have been destroyed, made into rubble, where 80% of the schools and 80% of the mosques and 2 out of the 3 churches have all been destroyed. 20 out of Gaza's 36 hospitals are partially functioning. And when they say partially, that means usually 1 room to keep goods sterile and all the patients either in a room with bloody floors or outside, waiting to be seen by doctors outside, without medical supplies, without medicine. The doctors who go in now, the internationals, the few who are allowed in, most are being turned away now, they can't get their Israeli visas. Those few who are allowed in are not allowed to bring any medications with them. It used to be that they would carry 2 suitcases each with the most desperately needed antiseptics, antibiotics, anesthetics. You've all heard about too many children facing amputation without anesthesia. And now, the US has just announced they have stopped medical visas for emergency care for children who were coming to this country to deal with the consequences of their life-altering injuries if they didn't die from them. Living in Gaza today, imagine, with 1 limb missing, or 2 limbs, or both eyes. These are the children who are trying to get here for help. And because of some, I don't know who she is, some lunatic right-wing whatever, who thinks that children missing eyes and arms and legs are somehow a threat to her safety or to US foreign policy, they are no longer to be allowed in. Because this is our genocide. This is a US-Israeli genocide. This is not just the US complicit in. Plenty of countries around the world are complicit in this genocide. Germany, of all countries, which has up until now been providing 30% of Israel's military support, the other 70% comes from us. Germany has just announced they're going to stop sending weapons. That was huge. You all know probably about the level of repression that is attacking the movement that are our counterparts in Germany. It's worse than here. And we know the history, we know why it's so difficult, all that stuff, we know all that. And yet a new generation in Germany, like the justice generation here, who came of age in 2020 in the wake of the murder of George Floyd, and said that the racial reckoning is now their key, central, moral issue of their time. Now that issue is Gaza for that generation. And it's also happening in Germany. So we have this extraordinary role of countries that have been complicit that are now pulling back under extraordinary pressure from movements just like ours. Soon we will be the only country left that is defending and participating in this genocide. Because when you provide the weapons and you provide the money, last year, our tax dollars funded 40% of the entire Israeli military budget. How sick is that? How sick is that? This year, it's likely to be more, not less. So this is our genocide that we are responsible for. At the same time, we are seeing right now one of the biggest shifts in public discourse in this country that we have ever seen. This is the optimistic side. You know, part of my job in the movement for a long time has been the one who finds something good to talk about, right? We can't just leave people with the horror, with the moment of monsters. And that's true, right? Because we have to keep fighting. And we need joy, and we need poetry, we need theater, we need music, and we need some good news to keep fighting. So there is good news. Some of the good news has to do, this is like really weird up here, I gotta tell you. Don't do this if you have a choice. Some of what we're looking at right now in these shifts can be seen in the polls. Now, polls are a dicey proposition, right? They're a snapshot. They're at this moment, X percentage of people said Y, right? But when you start seeing a pattern, and the polls stay at the same level and then get higher and higher, and they're going in the same direction, then you can't just say, well, this is just a snapshot, we can ignore it. Because suddenly it starts to reflect a reality of something that is changing in public opinion, and eventually in the media. As bad as the media is, don't even imagine how much better it is to compare it to what it was 2 years ago, 5 years ago, 20 years ago. The fact that the word Nakba is in the mainstream press without anybody thinking they have to define it anymore. It would have been unheard of 5 years ago for the word Nakba to appear anywhere, right? It's very, very different now. We're at a moment when 43% of people in this country say Israel is committing genocide. 65% of Democrats is saying that. It's also a generational issue. On that question, is Israel committing genocide? 38% of people over 65 say yes, Israel is committing genocide. 54% of people between 18 and 29 say Israel is committing genocide. More than half. Think of that. That's the generation rising. That's the justice generation claiming their moral center. How extraordinary is that? These are the young people, the students who built the encampments last year and are paying still such a high price for their activities. That's who we're talking about here. 61% of people across this country say no more arms to Israel. When we're talking about Democrats, that number goes up to 77%. Imagine, more than 3/4 of Democrats say no more arms to Israel. That's like unheard of. I've been working in this movement a really long time. And when I saw it, I thought, oh, that's gotta be fake. That's gotta be fake news. Somebody's like trying to make me feel better. It was true. It was true. And that's the moment that we are in now. But of course, it isn't just about numbers. And it's not just about what's changing in the discourse. Because at the end of the day, the discourse shift is in 3 parts. First, you change public opinion. And then the media shifts in response to that. And eventually you get the shift in the policy debate, the policy discourse, and eventually the votes, right? Eventually you get the United States to stop sending the weapons. Now, how do we know that it works that way? Because we've seen it before, and we know this works. I want to say something about international law in just a minute, but I want to put it in the context of something, and that is the South African movement model that we are looking at. Not just what South Africa has done, which is extraordinary, and what I'll talk about in a minute, and it's a big part of why I decided to write this book when I did. That's a hint that there's a lot about South Africa in the book. You'll like it. It's also this notion that in the 1980s, when around the world the international component of the South African freedom movement, the anti-apartheid movement, was on the rise, right? It was gaining more and more influence and power in countries all around the world, movements everywhere. And what were they mobilizing around? They had a menu of options that came from the General Assembly of the United Nations. How did that happen? It's because a few countries, mainly the frontline states that supported the anti-apartheid struggle in South Africa, the Southern African frontline states, would introduce to the Security Council resolution after resolution after resolution calling for sanctions, calling for banking sanctions, calling for an arms embargo, calling for all this stuff. And the US would say, oh, veto, end of story. So they would then take it to the General Assembly, where the US has no veto, right? That's in a context between the year 1970 and 1994, when apartheid was overthrown in South Africa. 1/3 of all US vetoes were cast to protect apartheid South Africa and make sure that they were never held accountable. In that same period, 1/2 of the vetoes were cast to defend Israeli apartheid. We didn't all call it apartheid then, but that's what it was. Now it's easier to call it apartheid. So we're looking at that moment of a movement that looked at what happened in the General Assembly. The General Assembly passed these resolutions with enormous majorities, right? 140 to 2. No, it was never 2, it was usually about 8. And then 20 or 30 abstentions. But huge numbers of countries supporting sanctions and arms embargoes and trade sanctions and ending diplomatic relations, all this stuff. And the US would say, well, it doesn't matter because General Assembly resolutions aren't really enforceable in international law. And the answer was, maybe not by UN structures, but it is enforceable by us, by movements, by social mobilizations in all these countries all around the world, where people just like us were doing exactly what we do, going to the Capitol and saying, we demand X, Y, and Z. Here's a list of things to do that the General Assembly says, if you're in compliance of international law, you must do all these things. And we know you're not going to do all of them, but you should at least do number 7 and number 17 and number 32. You can leave the others for next year, but for now you should do these 3 things. And they started doing it. That's the amazing thing. Countries all around the world started joining this anti-apartheid movement. And eventually, more and more allies of the United States started joining. And when they did, the US started getting more and more worried because they were getting more and more isolated. Remember, it's in the context of the Cold War. They needed all these allies. They couldn't afford to have half of Europe opposed to them on this very crucial issue. And all of their rhetoric about, well, we may not like everything that the apartheid government does, but you know, they're standing up against communism. That wasn't working anymore. It wasn't enough. So these movements were holding up the resolutions of the General Assembly. And now we get to what do we have to hold up? We have it too. And I'm going to tell you the details in a minute. But I do want to say that what we're looking at now is a moment when we have seen a movement rising in the streets that is so much bigger and so much broader and operates with people so much closer to power than the long-standing Palestinian rights movement ever dreamed of. Many of you were probably in the streets in November of 2023 when it was just in the first couple of months of the genocide when there was a national mobilization called in Washington, D.C. And there were somewhere close to 400,000 people in the streets. We had never seen anything like that. And I will say right up front that the Palestinian rights movement, which I've been a part of proudly for many, many years, was not the reason they were all there. That was the ceasefire movement. It was a related, a partner, a sibling movement, but it was a different movement. It was made up of people, many of whom had never come into the streets in support of Palestinian rights, didn't know much about Palestine, didn't necessarily care very much about Palestine. Maybe they were climate activists, maybe they were immigrant rights folks, maybe they were in the women's movement, maybe they were LGBTQ folks, maybe they were trade unions in the labor movement, whatever they were, or maybe they weren't activists at all. It wasn't because of what we did, mobilizing in some political context. It was because of what people saw on their phone 24/7 for week after week after week. We saw what genocide looks like up close and personal. And people reacted as human beings and said, no, this cannot stand. We cannot allow this to happen. And knowing that we are paying for it, and that we are choosing and producing the weapons, and making it all possible, and protecting the people who carry it out, so they are never held accountable, that is not okay. So we had a movement that did two extraordinary things. Number one, it was sort of defined as the ceasefire movement. And it kept that level of message discipline way better than the Palestinian rights movement ever did. We were never known for being so disciplined on message, which is true of most movements, I would say. Nobody's very good at that. But this movement, from all over the country, was saying, ceasefire now. Very quickly, they were able to do a second thing, which was to expand the definition of ceasefire to incorporate what it really would require to end this horrific attack, this genocide, this assault. It meant that ceasefire not only was going to be immediate and permanent, was going to mean, number one, stop firing, stop dropping bombs, stop sending the drones. Yes, stop killing people with your weapons. That's number one. Number two, allow in, flood the place with humanitarian aid, with food and water and medicine and fuel and electricity and all the things that have been missing, mostly for 17 years, but especially for the last year and a half. And number three, the most important for us, stop sending the weapons. All of that was bound up in the call for ceasefire now. It was an extraordinary thing to see. And that kind of broad movement, it's also a model of what we're going to need for the movement against the rise of fascism in our country, because it comes from the same roots, right? What fascism at home is what colonialism abroad looks like. It's the same weapons. That's what we're facing. So when we think about, you know, how this worked, you had the South Africa model, and then you had the extraordinary action that South Africa took. And this was important for two reasons. The most important reason was that this is the beginning of a process to actually hold Israel accountable for its genocide. The Genocide Convention requires every country that signs on to it, which includes the vast majority of countries in the world, ironically including the US and Israel, are all signatories to that convention. And that convention doesn't just say it's illegal for a country to carry out a genocide. It says that any country that's a signatory to this convention has a big obligation. One is to prevent genocide, and the other is, if there is a genocide, to do everything in your power to stop it. It's an affirmative obligation. You know, it's one of these things, a lot of international law, are there any lawyers here? Good. Sorry, I'm a fan of Henry James. You know, remember what Shakespeare wrote? Not Henry James, Henry VI. First thing we do, let's kill all the lawyers. I don't advocate that, but I'm just saying. International law has been designed largely to be completely inaccessible to most normal people, right? It's complicated, it's opaque, you don't know what they're talking about, the words make no sense. They speak in Latin with no translation. It's like, what are we talking about here? But there's two pieces of international law, the Genocide Convention and the Apartheid Convention, that are not like that at all. They're very short, they're very simple, they have definitions and they have like 5 or 6 clauses, and they talk about obligations, right? So the Genocide Convention that South Africa brought as a case against Israel in the World Court, the International Court of Justice, which is a court for countries to bring cases against each other, right? Usually it's border disputes, that kind of thing. This time, South Africa said Israel stands in violation of the Genocide Convention, and as a signatory to the convention, we are harmed by that. It was the essence of internationalism. That was the most important part. The second part that was also so important is that, like so many other parts of the UN system, There was always the assumption from the creation of the UN right after World War II, victor's justice and all that stuff, that the agencies, including the World Court, really didn't belong to the whole world. They belonged, shall I say, to the white colonials. They belonged to North America, Egypt, no. They belonged to North America, to Europe, to Australia, to New Zealand, to South Africa, the settler colonial countries around the world. And South Africa said, you know what? Not anymore. Now it's ours as well. It belongs to Africa. It belongs to the global South. It belongs to South Africa because we know what apartheid looks like and we are not going to stand by and watch it happen again. It was an extraordinary moment. I don't know how many of you, but I stayed up and I got up at 4 o'clock in the morning the day that South Africa was arguing its case at the ICJ in The Hague. It was one of the most extraordinary experiences of my life. First, seeing this team of a rainbow of South African lawyers, some of them not even from South Africa. It was a global internationalist group of lawyers, got up to argue, some of them wearing keffiyehs, some of them wearing the South African flag with the Palestinian flag. And I was on a text thread with, I had the privilege of doing some work with the South Africans in preparation for this case. And we were on this text thread with some people in South Africa, some Palestinians, both in Palestine and in the diaspora, and a couple of us, 3 or 4 of us in the US, passing back and forth ideas. And one of my South African friends wrote, I have never been so proud to be a South African, and I've never been so proud to be a human being. It was an extraordinary moment because we were seeing right there this effort for the first time in a serious way to hold Israel accountable. So what does that mean? It led to the court in remarkably short time, because these courts take years, and this one will be years before they issue a final decision. I'm afraid it'll be another year or more. But their preliminary decision came out in less than a month. That basically never happens. And their preliminary decision said this case shows that Israeli actions are plausibly genocide. It wasn't a final determination, but that it's plausible it's genocide, and therefore, Israel must do the following 6 things. The first of which was stop killing people. The second was stop injuring people. Now, why are those 2 key things important? Those are 2 of the components of the Genocide Convention. Because remember I said the Genocide Convention is different, it's kind of easy to understand? So the Genocide Convention, it requires 2 things to happen for some terrible act to be considered genocide. The first is there has to be a specific intention to destroy all or part of a group. A group that's defined by race, by religion, by language, by national origin, by many different things. If the intention of an action is to destroy that group, that's the first requirement. The second requirement is that there be at least 1 of 5 specific acts of violence. Number 1 is killing people in the group. Number 2 is injuring people in the group. Number 3 is creating conditions that lead to the destruction, that make it impossible for the group as a group to survive. So that one is key because it means you don't actually have to kill anybody. If you forcibly disperse people, like what happened in the Nakba of 1948, that's a kind of genocide. If you take away the water sources of a population and force them to leave to find water somewhere else, maybe you didn't kill anybody, but you destroyed the group. That's genocide. Forced transfer can be genocide, if the intention is to destroy that group. And usually what makes it really hard to even imagine putting on trial a government for genocide is because it's so hard to figure out how do you prove their intention. It's hard enough with a person. You know, in criminal law, there's a similar thing about specific intent crimes. But when you're talking about a government, how do you prove intent? Well, it turns out Israel showed us how. They were proud of it. Everyone from the prime minister to the defense minister to members of the Knesset to everybody in the cabinet to poets and musicians and the opposition forces were all talking about Hamas is not the only enemy. Our enemy is everybody in Gaza. We will kill them all, children included. When I heard that, it sounded all too familiar. This was the language of what is known here as the Indian Wars. Some of you will remember Sand Creek. Colonel John Chivington, a Methodist minister actually, who was leading his troops in 1862, I think it was, ordered them to attack one night a village on the shores of a creek in Colorado. And some of his soldiers went out to scout it out, and they came back and said, we can't do this, they're all asleep. We promised to defend these tribes. And they've got kids, they've got children, there's got old people. And his answer was, nits make life. Nits make lice, kill them all. That was the language we were hearing in Israel, not just in this period of the genocide. It came before, when the then justice minister talked about how we need to kill all the little snakes so they don't grow up to be big snakes. This is the argument of dehumanization. That's the first step towards genocide. You have to make sure that your people think that these are not people, that you can destroy them with impunity because they're not people, right? And that's what we are fighting against. And that's what this movement for ceasefire and for Palestinian rights, these movements together, what makes them so important. And why we say that the model of the South African anti-apartheid movement is so important. So when we meet with governments at the UN, I was in with a little team doing some lobbying a few weeks ago with some Palestinians and some South Africans to talk to them about what they should be doing. Number one, stop sending the weapons. And that means a comprehensive arms embargo. And it means stop allowing Israel to speak and vote in the General Assembly. You don't need Security Council approval for that. The Assembly itself can decide that. And number three, reopen the General Assembly's Committee Against Apartheid that played such a huge role in the anti-apartheid movement through the 80s and into the 90s. Reopen that with the understanding that that apartheid is not over. That's the best way of signaling that the era of genocide is done. So all of this goes to the question of how we see our history, how we see the role of movements, how we see the potential for what individual governments do, ultimately how we see the United Nations. You know, there was a period in the run-up to the war in Iraq, some of you will remember that the Security Council refused the US and British pressure to endorse the war. They stood silent. There were several countries on the council that were against it. That included Germany and France, that included one or two others, and there were what were known as the uncommitted six. These were 6 countries from the global south who individually could never have the power to stand up to the United States. The risk would be too great. They were, let me see if I can do this, I used to do it without even thinking. This was Pakistan, Chile, Mexico, yikes, Cameroon, Guinea, that's 5, one more. It'll come to me at 3 o'clock in the morning. I'll call you all and let you know. This was, you know, they refused. They were sort of derisively called the uncommitted 6. The powerful countries on the Security Council called them the 6-pack. You know, we don't take them seriously. But they prevented the UN from giving permission to the US and Britain from going to war against Iraq, which made the war not only immoral and outrageous, which we knew it was, but it made it also illegal for them to go to war without the approval of the United Nations. That was huge. And that lasted for 8 months until the Security Council finally collapsed under more pressure. The United Nations essentially endorsed the occupation. And 2 months later paid an enormous price with the truck bombing of the UN headquarters at the Canal Hotel in Baghdad, when 22 members of the UN staff were killed. That was the price they paid for endorsing this horrific occupation. But for 8 months they didn't do that. So that's huge. So, you know, when we think about this, we think about what might be possible. And we have to remember that things like this, like the overthrow of apartheid in South Africa, was impossible to imagine until it became inevitable. That's our job, to turn the impossible into the inevitable. Some of that has to do with fighting back against the pressures that we're under, the repression that's facing our movement, the so-called Project Esther that some of you may have heard about, that outlines a very specific plan for using the false claims of anti-Semitism to go after huge parts of the population of this country, starting with international students who might have the audacity to criticize US policy in the Middle East, that they should be rounded up and deported. Hello, Mahmoud Khalil. But we are looking at a moment, and I'm going to end with this, because I want to end with something positive again. When we talk about how the media has changed, this isn't just sort of some idea. I was looking the last few days. I get the print editions of both the Times and the Washington Post and the New York Times. And I read them, which sometimes is very unpleasant, but sometimes is extraordinary, unpleasant for a different reason. So a couple of weeks ago, the Washington Post had a front page article focused on the fact that now 60,000 Gazans who were known to have been killed by Israeli weapons. That's only those who are identified by name, by ID number, not counting the thousands who are under the rubble, who we will never know. Not counting many others, but the ones that we can identify by name, who they were, how old they were, and what was their name, and what was their ID number, was over 60,000. That was on the front page. And then it jumped. It jumped to a 2-page spread that is in tiny little 4-point type, the names, name after name after name of children who have been killed, with their name in Arabic and in English. And when you get to the very bottom, and then there's statistics about it, how many of each age were killed. And when you get to the very end of this endless, endless list with pictures of some of them, who were their families, you get to the following message. The names up to this point represent less than 18% of the children who have died since October 2023. The remaining names would continue across 5 additional pages. The Washington Post ran this. It wasn't a paid ad. And they did it not because Jeff Bezos, for God's sakes, cares one bit about children in Gaza. He cares about profits and nothing else. But there are people rising up within the Post system, which is this huge bureaucracy, this huge institution, demanding that they change their policy and allow things like this to be published. And they're doing that because we are outside demanding the same thing. The New York Times last week, a full page interview with Mahmoud Khalil. That doesn't just happen. That happens because of our movements. And it's those things that happen that make the worst of the mainstream press, and I must say the Times and the Post, as bad as they are not exactly the worst, but they're right up there. They have changed around this. They are changing because of the pressure they're feeling from their movements, which influences who's going to get. Not everybody should get the print editions. It's way too expensive. But they're losing subscriptions. They do care about that. So we are able to use the plan of the BDS movement, the boycott, divestment, and sanctions movement, to bring this continuing pressure, nonviolent economic pressure to bear on the Israeli state to make it impossible for them to continue its genocide, to continue the apartheid system. The challenge that we face, and I leave you with this, is that all of these activities, changing the discourse, changing the media, writing a book, are all focused on medium and long-term change. Those things are crucial. That's ultimately how we win. But right now, we don't have a medium and a long-term. Children are being killed today, now, this hour. And that's what we face. That's our challenge. We need to continue the medium and long-term stuff. That's how we win. And we need new strategies, new tactics, creative strategies to figure out how to undermine their ability to continue providing these arms. How do we stop the arms? That's our immediate task. I leave you with that, and it's organizations like the Syracuse Peace Council and all of you, all of these extraordinary organizations, my own organization, JVP, and so many others. It's our job to figure that out. Thank you.